What's going to become of Gaza? Right now, we're seeing this strip of land in a perpetual state of conflict, marked by ongoing tensions with Israel and largely controlled by groups like Hamas, whose stated goal is the destruction of Israel. This situation begs the question, what will ultimately happen? What does the Bible say about Gaza's fate? In this documentary, we'll delve into the prophecies to uncover what God has revealed about Gaza and how Scripture predicts its end. Before we go on, tell us what you think will happen to Gaza. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're eager to hear your perspective. Let's dive in. Gaza isn't some modern name that newspapers came up with. It's one of the oldest names we know in human history. Its Hebrew root, Gaza, means fortress, power, or strong city, and that meaning is no accident. Gaza has always been a strategically important location, a wall between empires, a key point controlling caravan routes from Egypt to Mesopotamia. Whoever held Gaza controlled passage between two continents. Archaeologists have confirmed that Gaza was inhabited as far back as the 3rd millennium BC. Egyptian inscriptions mention it as a city conquered by Pharaoh Thutmose III in the 15th century BC, when he expanded his empire into Canaan. We also find it in the Amarna letters from the 14th century BC, where Canaanite kings asked Egypt for help against invasions and rebellions. From ancient times, Gaza has been a crossroads, a place of power and conflict. With the arrival of the Philistines in the 12th century BC, Gaza became one of the 5 major cities of the Philistine Pentapolis, along with Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. From there, they launched attacks against Israel, built idolatrous temples, and strengthened their position on the coast. It was in Gaza that the Philistines captured Samson, Israel's judge, and paraded him in humiliation in their pagan temple. That image has remained a symbol of the animosity between Gaza and Israel, a city that stood against God's people. Archaeologist William Foxwell Albright, considered a pioneer of biblical archaeology, stated that Gaza was the most strategic trading point in the Philistine region, the gateway to Canaan facing Egypt. The Greek historian Strabo called it the gateway to Asia because whoever owned Gaza controlled not only trade, but also the movement of armies between continents. But here's the paradox. Although Gaza was called a fortress, it never managed to sustain peace. Its walls were repeatedly torn down by conquerors: Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Crusaders, Ottomans. They all passed through Gaza, leaving destruction in their wake. Its history is a constant cycle of war, collapse, and rebuilding. Isn't it surprising that a name meaning fortress has become synonymous with ruin? How can a city meant to be powerful become a symbol of sorrow? The answer lies not in its geography or its politics, but in prophecy. From the beginning, Gaza was destined to be a scene of judgment. Its walls would not stand. Its palaces would not endure because the God of Israel had decreed its end. Now, in Philistine times, Gaza wasn't just a military stronghold. Its true strength lay in its strategic position as a gateway to international trade. Located on the ancient Via Maris, the route connecting Egypt with Mesopotamia, Gaza was a vital stop for caravans laden with spices, metals, grains, and textiles. Whoever controlled Gaza controlled the passage of the riches of the ancient world. Archaeologist Trude Dothan, a specialist in Philistine culture, explained that the cities of the Pentapolis, especially Gaza, grew wealthy through maritime and land trade. Its port, although small, connected them to Cyprus, Crete, and Egypt. Fragments of Mycenaean pottery and imported metal objects demonstrate that Gaza was integrated into an international economic system long before the days of the kings of Israel. Culturally, Gaza was a melting pot. Canaanite, Egyptian, and Aegean influences mingled there. The Philistines adopted customs from each people but maintained their warlike identity. Its walls and palaces reflected power but also luxury. Excavations in the region reveal large vessels decorated with marine symbols, figurines of deities, and remains of fortified structures that demonstrate an architectural style advanced for its time. Religiously, Gaza was a center of idolatry. They worshipped not only Dagon but also Ashtaroth and Baal. The inscriptions found in the Philistine area reflect sacrifices, fertility rituals, and practices that contrasted with the holiness demanded by the God of Israel. This explains why the prophets denounced not only the violence in Gaza, but also its spiritual corruption. The Greek historian Herodotus, in the 5th century BC, mentions Gaza as a prosperous and powerful city in his time. For ancient peoples, Gaza represented a place of abundance and wealth. But this prosperity wasn't accompanied by justice, but rather by oppression and violence. In the words of the prophets, Gaza was marked for participating in a slave trade, handing over entire populations in exchange for profit. Its economic power was stained with blood. Thus, Gaza in Philistine times was much more than a military fortress. It was a commercial, cultural, and religious center, a place where caravans crossed, where temples rose with the smoke of pagan sacrifices, and where riches circulated to the rhythm of idolatry. But all that splendor was destined to fall because behind the walls and the markets, Gaza had sown violence and sin. The paradox remains. A city that meant strength and was presented as an emporium of wealth and power was described in the Bible as a land of ruin. And no matter how great the walls are or how abundant the treasures are, when God decrees judgment, nothing can stand. Now Gaza, the city that meant strength, was directly singled out by the prophets as a land of judgment. God didn't speak in generalities. He raised voices that denounced specific sins and announced specific consequences. Each prophetic sentence was linked to Gaza's actual behavior. Let's read Amos 1 verse 6 and 7. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not revoke the punishment, because they carried into exile entire communities, delivering them up to Edom. So I will send fire upon the wall of Gaza, and it shall devour its strongholds. Amos prophesied in the 8th century BC, a time when Gaza prospered at the expense of others' suffering. The divine accusation was clear. They had turned the city into a slave market. Gaza not only engaged in wars against Israel, it also captured entire villages, entire families, and sold them to Edom as mere objects. Its economy was stained with innocent blood. God responded with perfect justice. Amos's announcement was that the walls of Gaza would be consumed by fire. What did this mean? The walls were a symbol of its military power and security. God announced that they would burn, that their strength would be breached. The palaces represented the luxury and authority of their rulers. They would be reduced to ashes, showing that judgment would come upon the elite who had made unjust decisions. The violence with which Gaza trafficked lives would be met with the violence of judgment. What they sowed in pain, they would reap in destruction. For his part, the prophet Zephaniah 2 verse 4 says, Gaza shall be deserted, and Ashkelon shall become a desolation. Ashdod's people shall be driven out at noon, and Ekron shall be uprooted. A century later, Zephaniah added another dimension of punishment, total abandonment. Gaza would be forsaken. The Hebrew word used means left alone, without owner, without protection. It's the image of a ghost town, of ruins that no one wants to rebuild. This judgment was linked to the sin of pride. Gaza had prided itself on its strategic position. It controlled trade routes and established alliances with major powers, and its inhabitants believed this geographical advantage ensured a prosperous future. They trusted their walls and their treaties, but not God. The prophet announces that this trust would be broken. Gaza would be left empty, without an army, without commerce, without splendor. The place that had been a symbol of movement and wealth would become ruin and silence. The prophecy isn't an abstract discourse. Each of Gaza's sins received a corresponding punishment: human trafficking, as Amos mentioned, exploiting entire villages to profit from slaves, punishment, fire and destruction of walls and palaces, pride and confidence in one's strategic position. Mentioned by Zephaniah, believing oneself to be untouchable due to alliances and trade routes, punishment, abandonment, desolation, and total emptiness. Gaza was denounced because it became an example of social corruption and political arrogance. Instead of using its privileged location for blessing, it used it to enrich itself through injustice. Instead of relying on God, they relied on walls and alliances. Therefore, the prophets declared that their walls would burn and their land would be left desolate. After Amos and Zephaniah, the voice of another prophet added an even deeper dimension to the fate of Gaza, the prophet Zechariah. He spoke not only of physical ruin, but also of inner pain, spiritual confusion, and the total loss of hope. Let's read Zechariah 9 verses 5 to 7. Ashkelon shall see it and be afraid. Gaza also shall see it and be in great agony. Ekron 2, because its hope is confounded. The king shall perish from Gaza. Ashkelon shall be uninhabited. A mongrel people shall settle in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of Philistia. I will take out its blood from its mouth, and its abominations from between its teeth. It too shall be a remnant for our God. It shall be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron shall be like the Jebusites. Zechariah announces that Gaza will be deeply pained, a pain that isn't only physical due to war, but spiritual due to the loss of its hope. The expression, its hope is confounded, reflects the ruin of everything that sustained the city. Its kings, who represented political power, would disappear. Their covenants, in which they trusted, would be broken. Their idolatry, the source of their spiritual identity, would be uprooted. Gaza had placed its trust in its leaders, its gods, and its military might. But prophecy reveals that all of that would be shaken, leaving it without direction, without guidance, and without a future. The phrase, "I will take out its blood from its mouth, and its abominations from between its teeth," points to the religious practices of the Philistines in Gaza. They performed idolatrous rituals that included blood sacrifices and foods dedicated to pagan deities. God declares that he will put an end to these practices, uprooting the idolatry that contaminated the city. This shows that God's judgment isn't limited to destroying walls and palaces. His judgment also touches the spiritual. Gaza would be punished not only for the violence of its wars, but also for the corruption of its cults, which increasingly distanced it from the true God. Zechariah adds a surprising detail. In the midst of judgment, there would be a remnant for God. A small group of people in Gaza would turn to the Lord. This message shows that even in a land marked by ruin, God's grace can rescue. Gaza wouldn't be completely erased without a trace, but a remnant would be redeemed, integrated into the divine plan as a clan in Judah. This reveals God's mercy in the midst of judgment. The city would be broken, but a remnant would find salvation. Zechariah's announcement connects directly with the spiritual and political condition of Gaza. A city that lived in idolatry, violence, and dependence on human leaders would be brought to pain, confusion, and the loss of its power. Zechariah shows that the end of Gaza will not only be material destruction, but also a spiritual and political breakdown. Its idols will be uprooted, its leaders eliminated, and its pride shattered. But at the same time, a small remnant will be reached by God's mercy. This reminds us that although Gaza is the scene of judgment, divine sovereignty also includes the possibility of redemption for those who turn to him. Now the year is 332 BC. The young conqueror Alexander the Great advances with a seemingly unstoppable army. His ambition is clear: dominate the entire Mediterranean corridor and break through to Egypt. In their path, a city rises like a wall that refuses to let them pass: Gaza. Gaza was no ordinary village. Its walls were high and thick, built on a hill that gave it a strategic advantage. From its towers, the defenders could see for miles around, monitoring the movement of the armies. The Persian commander Badis, governor of the city, knew that surrender meant dishonor, and so he decided to resist. Alexander ordered the siege. For 2 long months, Gaza became a battlefield. The Macedonians dug trenches, built earthen ramps, and dragged enormous siege towers up to the walls. Day after day, catapults launched stones that shook the city's defenses. Inside the city, men, women, and children prepared to resist to their last breath. Finally, the walls gave way. The Macedonian army swept in. What followed was a bloodbath. Thousands of inhabitants were executed, and the survivors were sold into slavery. Gaza, which had proudly resisted, was reduced to ruins. The fate of their governor, Badis, went down in history as one of Alexander's cruelest acts. Refusing to kneel before him, he was captured and dragged alive, tied to a chariot around the collapsed walls. The message was clear: no city that challenged the conqueror would be left standing. With this victory, Alexander secured the passage to Egypt and consolidated his hold on the region. Gaza, on the other hand, was forever marked as a destroyed, plundered, and subjugated city. From then on, its history became a symbol. No matter how many times its walls were rebuilt, it would always fall under the power of new empires. After Alexander the Great's conquest, Gaza was rebuilt again and again. Each empire claimed it as its own because its location remained vital, a gateway between Africa and Asia, an essential passage for armies and caravans. In the year 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey captured Gaza and incorporated it into Roman rule. The Romans rebuilt it, erecting temples, theaters, and a central market, restoring it to some of its former splendor. Gaza became a commercial center for the region, with caravans arriving from Egypt, Arabia, and Syria. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus mentions it in his Antiquities, describing it as a city active in maritime and land trade. The Greek geographer Strabo, a contemporary of Christ, also spoke of Gaza, highlighting its importance as a connecting point on international routes. But its brilliance didn't prevent conflict during the Great Jewish Revolt against Rome in 66 AD. Gaza was attacked by Jewish groups, demonstrating that the city was always embroiled in political and religious tensions. With the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity, Gaza experienced a period of transition. Until the 4th century, the city was known as a bastion of paganism. Its temples were dedicated to Mars, Aphrodite, Apollo, and Zeus, and its population resisted the change of faith. Bishop Porphyry of Gaza, between 347 and 420 AD, was the one who led the transformation. According to the historian Sozomen in his ecclesiastical history, Porphyry asked for help from the Emperor Arcadius, and with the support of the Empress Eudoxia, the temples were demolished and a great church was built in their place. This event marked the triumph of Christianity in Gaza, but also the violent disappearance of its ancient religiosity. In the year 637 AD, during the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab, Gaza fell under Muslim control. For Islam, Gaza acquired special significance because Hashim ibn Abd Manaf, the great-grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad, died and was buried there. From then on, the city was called Gazat Hashim, a title that reinforced its religious importance. During the Middle Ages, Gaza passed from one hand to another. In the 12th century, it was conquered by the Crusaders, who fortified it. The Arab historian Ibn al-Athir describes how Saladin recaptured it in 1187 after the Battle of Hattin. Later, under the Mamluks and then the Ottomans, Gaza remained a secondary city. Though always strategically important due to its location, Rome, Byzantium, Islam, the Crusaders, and the Ottomans all left their mark on Gaza. Remains of Roman amphitheaters, Byzantine mosaics, and Islamic mosques have been found in its archaeological layers, evidence of its constant transformation. But there's a common thread running through its history. It's never been stable, always under the control of external powers, always contested, always wounded. Each empire that came gave it a new face, but none brought lasting peace. Gaza became a city symbolizing the cycles of history, rising in splendor, falling under the weight of war, and rising again only to fall again. Now, with the arrival of the 20th century, Gaza was once again at the center of the great movements of history. Their land, small in area, once again became the scene of international disputes and the reflection of a conflict that continues to ignite the world to this day. After World War I in 1917, Gaza passed from Ottoman rule to the control of the British Empire. It was included in the British Mandate of Palestine, a territory administered by England under the supervision of the League of Nations. During this time, Gaza was caught between the contradictory promises the British made to Arabs and Jews. On the one hand, support for the creation of a Jewish national home. On the other, guarantees of autonomy for the Arabs. This double standard fueled growing tensions. Gaza, as part of Palestine, became a hotbed of protests, clashes, and rebellions against British rule. Following World War II and the partition of Palestine in 1947, Gaza became the center of the conflict. When Israel declared its independence in 1948, the First Arab-Israeli War broke out. Thousands of Palestinians fled or were expelled from their lands, and Gaza became a refuge for tens of thousands of them. The territory then came under Egyptian administration, which ruled it until 1967. During those years, Gaza became a giant refugee camp. The United Nations estimates that by 1950 more than two-thirds of Gaza's population were Palestinian refugees. The city was overcrowded, impoverished, and under constant military tension. In the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel occupied Gaza, along with the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. Since then, Gaza has remained under Israeli control for nearly 4 decades amidst endless conflict, uprisings, and tensions. In 1987, the First Intifada, a popular uprising against the Israeli occupation, erupted in the streets of Gaza and the West Bank. Stones, protests, barricades, and blood mark the beginning of a new phase in the conflict. It is in the midst of the scenario that a movement was born that would forever change the history of Gaza, Hamas. Hamas, an acronym for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, means Islamic Resistance Movement. But in Arabic, the word also conveys the idea of zeal and enthusiasm. From its very beginning, it wasn't just a political party. It was a religious, social, and military movement. Inspired by Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, it blended religion with politics and armed struggle, declaring that all of Palestine should be liberated through jihad, a holy war. In 1988, they published their founding charter. It spelled out their purpose bluntly: the destruction of the State of Israel. Hamas didn't recognize Israel's right to exist, nor did it accept peace processes or negotiations. The following years saw Hamas's growth. While the Palestinian Authority sought diplomatic agreements with Israel, Hamas grew stronger in the shadows with suicide attacks, ambushes, and a social aid network that gained sympathy among Gaza's poor. The organization built schools, hospitals, and mosques while building weapons arsenals and training militiamen. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Many thought this would open the door to peace. But in 2007, after bloody clashes with the Palestinian Authority, Hamas took full control of the territory. Since then, Gaza has been ruled by this group, isolated by international blockades, and turned into an enclave under constant fire. Last year, Hamas took the conflict to a new level. In a surprise attack, militants crossed the border, murdered civilians, and kidnapped dozens of Israelis, including women and children. The hostages were taken to Gaza and hidden in underground tunnels and secret houses, used as bargaining chips and human shields. The entire world watched in horror as entire families mourned their captive loved ones. Israel responded with an unprecedented offensive, aerial bombardments, ground incursions, and surgical strikes against Hamas leaders. Among the hardest hit were Yehia Sinwar, considered the strongman of Gaza, Marwan Issa, a military commander, and Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political leader, who was assassinated in Tehran. Each blow to the leadership unleashed more violence, and the civilian population was caught in the crossfire. Hamas currently rules Gaza with an iron fist. It is both a political and military organization. It controls the security apparatus, administers local institutions, regulates civilian life, and decides on war and peace. Its armed wing, the Ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, dominates the territory with thousands of fighters, weapons, and a vast network of underground tunnels. Although the Palestinian Authority exists in the West Bank, its power doesn't extend to Gaza. There, Hamas is the only real authority. Its leaders, despite the attacks, continue to dictate the enclave's course, maintaining a policy of constant confrontation with Israel and rejecting peace agreements. Today, Gaza is still described by analysts as the world's largest open-air prison. More than 2 million people survive crammed into just 141 square miles. Electricity is available for only a few hours a day. Drinking water is scarce. Unemployment is massive, and children grow up amidst ruins and war. For some, Gaza is a symbol of resistance against Israel. For others, it's a hotbed of terrorism. But behind the politics and ideology, what one sees is a wounded people trapped between the power of Hamas, the attacks of Israel, and the indifference of the great empires. Once again, Gaza remains what it always was, a disputed territory ruled with pride and violence and doomed to repeat the history of pain. Now we've seen the history. We've analyzed the prophecies. But now the big question arises, what will be the end of Gaza? As we have seen, Gaza has always been a place of conflict. In ancient times, it was a refuge for the Philistines who continually attacked Israel. And today, it remains a territory used by Hamas to launch attacks and kidnap Israelis. Gaza has, throughout the centuries, been a constant point of opposition to the people of God. But the prophets spoke clearly of their destiny. Have those words already been fully fulfilled in the past? Or is there still a final fulfillment to come? In ancient times, the prophet Amos raised his voice against Gaza. I will send fire upon the wall of Gaza, and it shall devour its strongholds. The sin singled out was clear: human trafficking. As we mentioned, the Philistines captured entire communities and sold them as slaves to Edom. Gaza profited from trading in human lives. That crime, in God's eyes, deserved fire and ruin. Now, let's really think about this for a second. Don't we see echoes of that very same sin in our world today? In 2023, Hamas kidnapped scores of Israelis, including defenseless women and children, and held them hostage in Gaza. If, in ancient times, the city traded in slaves, today it holds people captive, using them as pawns in a deadly game and as human shields. In the eyes of God, it's the exact same sin, just with a different mask on, treating precious human lives as mere merchandise. The judgment Amos proclaimed was a raging inferno on the walls and palaces of Gaza. And just last year, the entire world watched in horror as that fire rained down once more. Israel unleashed a relentless bombing campaign. Entire neighborhoods were completely leveled, reduced to nothing but ashes. Buildings were pulverized. Tunnels were obliterated. The palaces of Gaza, meaning its centers of power and command structures, were decimated. Was the prophecy fulfilled in that moment? The answer is complex, twofold even. On one hand, there was a partial fulfillment, a taste of what's to come. What Amos so boldly declared is constantly replayed throughout history as a divine pattern. Gaza sins, Gaza burns, its walls are engulfed in flames, its leaders meet their demise, and its people endure unimaginable suffering. But on the other hand, God's word also points to a final and complete fulfillment in the end times, a cataclysmic event. It won't simply be another bombing raid or another bloody war, but the ultimate and irreversible outcome when Gaza is utterly forsaken and left in desolate ruins, with absolutely no hope of recovery. The prophet Zephaniah made this crystal clear more than 2 millennia ago. For Gaza will be utterly forsaken. This isn't just a temporary abandonment, like when an army storms a city, loots it, and then retreats. Zephaniah paints a picture of a total and definitive abandonment, a complete severing of ties. It's the haunting image of a city stripped of all shelter, all protection, all semblance of stability. Gaza, whose very name once signified fortress, will become its polar opposite, a barren, fragile wasteland, devoid of anyone to offer support or assistance. This profound helplessness isn't limited to the military realm. It extends to the spiritual as well. It's the portrait of a city without God's protective embrace, without leaders capable of guiding it through the darkness, without even a glimmer of hope to cling to. And we see it unfolding before our very eyes today. Beyond the desperate acts of armed resistance, Gaza exists in a state of profound international isolation, blockaded by land, sea, and air, tragically trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of despair with no discernible way out. It's a chilling echo of Zephaniah's prophetic words. And the prophet Zechariah adds an even more chilling nuance to this grim picture. Gaza also will see it and will be greatly grieved, and the king of Gaza will perish. This isn't some fleeting moment of discomfort. It's the deep, agonizing pain of a broken people, of inhabitants losing what little they have left to cherish. The ominous phrase, "the king of Gaza will perish," points to the inevitable demise of its leadership. In ancient times, kings and rulers were often overthrown by invading foreign empires. In our modern era, we have witnessed Hamas leaders meeting their end in devastating airstrikes and intense military operations. Every single time one of these figures falls, this prophetic message is partially fulfilled, inching closer to its ultimate realization. Gaza is left reeling, without a strong leader to guide it, without a clear and unwavering voice, without a leadership structure capable of providing it with even a modicum of stability. But Zechariah's vision extends even further into the future. His prophecy reveals that a time is coming when Gaza will completely lose its leaders, its power, its very hopes for a better tomorrow. It will be a leadership definitively and irrevocably shattered in the context of God's final and righteous judgment. The city that once proudly stood tall will be utterly stripped bare. Its protective walls will be reduced to nothing but ashes. Its leaders will meet their demise, and its people will be left utterly confused, without direction, desperately searching for guidance in the overwhelming darkness. Gaza will ultimately find itself without a king, without a guiding hand, lost and adrift in its shattered hopes. What we're seeing in the news headlines today is nothing more than a preliminary glimpse, a mere prelude to that inevitable and devastating outcome. Every war, every instance of ruin, every fall of a leader is simply an echo, a faint foreshadowing of the greater fulfillment that is inexorably approaching. We've taken a journey through history, listened intently to the voices of the ancient prophets, and witnessed firsthand how Gaza has repeatedly succumbed to ruin and devastation. But the complete picture doesn't end there. The ultimate fate of Gaza is intricately connected to a much grander scenario, the day of the Lord and the final judgment of all nations. The prophet Joel transports us to the very end of days. Let's turn to Joel 3, verses 1 and 2. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I bring back the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on account of my people, my heritage Israel. The coming judgment won't be localized or confined to a specific region. It will be universal, encompassing the entire world. It's not merely Gaza pitted against Israel or Hamas battling Jerusalem. It will be the entire world drawn into a massive conflict against the very people of God. But what's truly striking is that Gaza finds itself on the front lines of this monumental confrontation. Since ancient times, this city has served as a hub for attacks against the Israelites, a notorious staging post for the abhorrent slave trade, and a place of constant violence and unrest. And even today, in the 21st century, It continues to fulfill that same dark role, remaining a territory that embodies deep-seated hostility toward Israel. Isn't this a clear indication that Gaza will inevitably be part of the great final judgment? Its troubled history has consistently positioned it in that very role, an enemy of Israel, an instrument of oppression, a territory synonymous with rebellion and defiance. The prophet Zechariah, in chapter 14, verse 2, adds further depth to this chilling vision. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Zechariah speaks of a global uprising, a unified coalition of nations rising up against Jerusalem. Gaza, as an integral part of that volatile and fiercely contested border region, will be fully absorbed into this violent coalition. What we're witnessing today, the relentless barrage of missiles, the horrifying kidnappings, the calculated attacks, and the devastating bombings, is merely a faint shadow of the far greater war that is yet to come. When the day of the Lord finally arrives, Gaza will not simply be a disputed territory caught in the crossfire. It will be the very epicenter, the focal point of divine judgment. The book of Revelation reveals the ultimate culmination of this conflict, and they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew, Armageddon. On that fateful day, the nations will march not based on rational political decisions, but driven by a powerful spiritual deception. They will be herded together by the malevolent spirits of evil to wage war against God himself. Gaza, a long-standing symbol of hostility toward Israel, will be completely engulfed in this all-encompassing war. What initially began with the ancient Philistines, what has relentlessly continued with Hamas, and what we're currently seeing in the news headlines will all reach its terrifying peak in this eschatological war, the final battle for the ages. When that momentous time finally comes, the words of the prophets will be completely and irrevocably fulfilled. This won't be some partial judgment, like the various conflicts we've sadly witnessed in modern wars. It will be the ultimate and definitive judgment, the culmination of all things. Gaza will never rise again from its ashes. Its desolate ruins will stand as an eternal testimony, a solemn reminder that God judges the nations that dare to rise up against Israel. Gaza thus serves as a profound and solemn warning to all peoples and nations. What may appear today as a mere political or territorial struggle is, in reality, a spiritual arena, a battleground for souls. Behind every missile fired, behind every heartless kidnapping, behind every act of senseless destruction, lies a far greater battle raging, the rebellion of the nations against God's divine plan. The ultimate end of Gaza serves as a stark sign for all of humanity, a cautionary tale for the ages. A city that always proudly believed itself to be an impenetrable fortress will ultimately find itself utterly abandoned and desolate. A land that defiantly rose up in violence against Israel will inevitably be reduced to ashes, its former glory forever extinguished. A people who place their unwavering trust in their kings and rulers will be left leaderless, confused, and trapped in a perpetual state of ruin and despair. The tragic story of Gaza serves as a mirror, reflecting the fate that awaits the entire world. Whoever dares to rise up against Israel is, in essence, rising up against God himself, and whoever chooses to stand against God cannot ultimately prevail. And so, we've reached the end of this video. Thank you, from the very depths of our hearts, for sticking with us until the end and for being a part of this crucial moment of truth and reflection. If this message deeply resonated with your life, we sincerely invite you to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this powerful message with someone who truly needs to hear it. Because with every click, with every act of sharing, you are actively helping to spread the word further, touching countless more hearts and lives. We eagerly anticipate meeting you again in our next video, where we'll share a new and inspiring message from heaven for your soul. Until that time, may God's boundless grace and unwavering peace accompany you each and every day. May God shower you with blessings beyond measure. Oh yeah,